Hello, and let us begin with the second part of the Chapter 9 vocabulary terms over World War I. We finished up the first 14 in our first video, and we're going to start the second video right now. And we'll start with number 15, and that is, of course, is Woodrow Wilson. Now, President Wilson we have discussed in previous chapters. He is one of the three progressive presidents, and we've talked about him several times. He was first elected in 1912 and then re-elected in 1916. One of the slogans he used and his people used to get him re-elected was, "He kept us out of war." Keep in mind, we talked about already, the war began in 1914. The election that he won, his second re-election, or his re-election, was in 1916. And he promised to not take us into World War I. Now, of course, he couldn't do that. Shortly after he was inaugurated in his second term, we were drawn into the war. And we've already talked about some of the reasons why that occurred. So he's American president during World War I. He attempted to follow the American policy of neutrality, and we'll talk about the definition of neutrality in a few moments. But because of events that surrounded him in the United States, we were forced into the war. The Seeking the Lusitania, the Zimmerman telegram, these things we've already talked about. Number 16, 14 points. Now, one of the things that Wilson is most remembered for is the fact that he was a progressive. A progressive believes in change through the legislative process. And we've talked about that in previous chapters. We've talked about all the different laws that were brought into play by Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson, child labor laws, for example. And Wilson felt that he could legislate peace upon the world. And so his plan, Wilson's plan, the 14 points, was a peace plan for the world after the end of the war. And he wanted the countries of the world to unite behind this plan. And he felt that this plan, if fully implemented, would bring about peace within our time, within our lifetimes. Unfortunately, once the war was over, some of the points were added to the Treaty of Versailles, which we'll talk about in the next term. Some of them were not. We, the United States, rejected pretty much all of Wilson's 14 points for a number of reasons, which we'll talk about when we get to them. Number 7, the Versailles Treaty, the Treaty of Versailles. The peace treaty which ended the war was extremely harsh on Germany. One of the things that it called for was reparations. Reparations are money paid due to damages done during the war. And Germany was required to pay in reparations as a result of the war $33 billion US. Now keep in mind, this is 1919 dollars. As I've told you, when John D. Rockefeller died, he was worth about $900 million, and that was in the late 20s. Today, that $100 million is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So you can well imagine how much $33 billion would be in today's dollars. I mean, it was a fantastic sum. Germany didn't have the money. And so because of this, Germany's economy suffered greatly. Hence, the extremely harsh conditions forced upon Germany by the Treaty of Versailles. One of the reasons why we didn't sign it, something else that's not mentioned here, is a clause in the Treaty of Versailles which Germany was forced to take all blame for the war. All the damages, all the death and destruction was laid at Germany's feet, which is one of the reasons why the reparations were so high. The League of Nations. This is Woodrow Wilson's baby. This is his brainchild. This is his favorite of the 14 points. Wilson wanted to create an international peacekeeping organization, similar to what we have today in the United Nations. In fact, the League of Nations was sort of the father of the United Nations, if you will. The League had noble goals. The idea was that countries who had some type of dispute, it could be a trade dispute, it could be a boundary dispute. For example, let's just say us and Mexico. The United States and Mexico have an issue. Let's say the Rio Grande shifts because of a hurricane. And now territory that had once been on the U.S. side is now on the Mexican side of the river. Well, short of going to war over this, the idea behind the League of Nations was to take that issue to the League and then a solution would be found. The idea was to get people to talk and not shoot at each other. So the League of Nations, Wilson's baby, was a place where countries get together, solve issues, boundary, trade, whatever issues it may be, before they start shooting. Unfortunately, for President Wilson and for the League itself, we, the United States, never joined the League of Nations. One reason for that was Henry Cabot Lodge. Senator Lodge was a very strong supporter of imperialism, and he was a very strong opponent of the League. He felt, Henry Cabot Lodge, Senator Lodge, and many, many others within the government, within the country, felt that by joining the League, we'd be giving up some of our own sovereignty, that we would now be giving precedence over, or precedence to, a international body that, to be perfectly honest, we're not really sure that we can trust. So the League of Nations was never adopted by us because we felt that the League of Nations, would take on too much power in America and arguably dictate to Americans how they could live, what they could do, what they could not do. For example, there is a gun ban treaty that is in the United Nations today that would essentially destroy the Second Amendment. And so if the United States were to sign on and agree to this, which, by the way, is not going to happen, but let's just say for fun they do, then private ownership of guns in the United States would end, much the same way we have seen, unfortunately, for the French over the course of the last couple of days. So, Lodge was opposed to the League. The League was never adopted by the United States. Let's move on to our next slide. Number 21, isolationism. Now, this is a concept that goes back a long time, all the way back, well, really, to George Washington, though we were somewhat isolationist in many ways before that. But the idea, the definition, America separating themselves from other countries' affairs. So to isolate ourselves, essentially, is we would keep out of other countries' problems. Washington urged that we do this in his farewell address, and we have talked about this several times. We have gone against this concept before because we felt that we had to. The Second American Revolution, the War of 1812, the Spanish-American War, the Mexican War, and now World War I were all wars that we got involved in, all wars that we felt that we must get involved in or we were forced into by events that we'd had no control over. But again, the definition of isolationism, America separating themselves from other countries' affairs, staying out of the affairs of other countries. Now, let's go back and look at the war itself a little bit. These terms are not necessarily in any specific order. So let's go to the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. We will be looking at some images of him on a PowerPoint or video. He was Austrian royalty. Austria was a monarchy, and he was part of the royal family. The Austrians exerted a great deal of control over the small nation of Serbia. And we'll look at a map, and I'll show you where these countries are later on. The Austrians had a lot of power over Serbia, and many Serbians didn't like that. And a particular group of them, known as the Black Hand, wanted to assassinate the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in a visit he had in Serbia. And the idea was that they were going to kill him, which would send a message to Austria, stay out of Serbia. Now, you think about it, it's kind of silly, but that's what they thought. So anyway, the Archduke and his wife, Sophia, were assassinated, and that assassination is the straw that broke the camel's back. It was the spark that lit the powder keg, whatever term, whatever phrase you want to use. It was his death. Now, again, it could have been any other thing. And there were any number of people who could have been killed or any number of events that could have occurred that would have had the same result. but it was his death and the death of his wife which led to this. And it's really kind of an interesting story. The Archduke was in Serbia on a tour. He and his group, a couple of cars, were there to inspect a factory. It doesn't really matter why they're there. Anyway, the Gabriel Princip, who was one of the leaders of the Black Hand, threw a grenade at the Archduke's car. It sort of bounced off, exploded a short distance away, injuring a couple of the guards who were there to protect the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife and the people who were there with him. The Archduke and his wife went on to their event. Once the event was over, the Archduke wanted to see the men who had been wounded, to thank them for their service, their help, to give his condolences to them for being injured. Anyway, along the way, the driver of the car that the Archduke was in got lost, went down a one-way street. As he was backing out to go to the hospital, who walks along? Gabriel Princip, the guy who wants to kill the Archduke. Well, Gabriel Princip sees the Archduke, grabs his pistol, runs toward the car, starts firing, hits and kills both the Archduke and his wife Sophia. The Austrians demand the Black Hand, and Princip in particular, be given to them for punishment. Serbia says no, or breaks out. And we'll talk about how that really works out when we get to the alliance system in one of the later slides. Now, the term the Western Front refers to the front between Germany and France. And we will see some maps of this later on, not in this video, but we will see some maps showing that. And the Western Front also refers to the trench warfare that was being fought there between those two countries. And we'll take a look at some video, we'll take a look at some maps, and I'll show that to you down the road. But the Western Front refers to the battlefield between the countries of France and Germany where trench warfare was being fought. Now, number 24, there were several new weapons being used during World War I: poison gas, tanks, airplanes, submarines. Now, we'll go into each and every one of these a little bit more depth in other venues, either other PowerPoints or videos, but these were all new, and they were all used with great efficiency, great effectiveness. The numbers were staggering, upwards of 20 million dead during World War I. And a lot of that came from these new weapons being used. Neutrality, a term that we have discussed, kind of goes hand in hand with isolation. An attempt to remain out of a dispute. Now, you could be neutral in a dispute between your brother and your sister, between your friends. A country can remain neutral. It doesn't mean you're not friends with those people you're trying to stay out of their fight, or you're not friends with the nations who are in a dispute. But again, you're trying to remain out of that fight because you don't want to take sides. Because it could, as a country, it could cost you money. Trade could be hurt because of this, and or it could draw you into war. Number 26, Medal of Honor. This is America's highest honor for gallantry in action. This is the highest honor we bestow upon our soldiers. It is a tremendous honor, and it is given out fairly rarely. If you win the Congressional Medal of Honor, you have done something truly outstanding, stupendous. Alvin York, we talked about him in the previous video, Congressional Medal of Honor winner. All he did was capture 132 Germans and kill 25 all by himself. Those are the kind of acts that win you the Medal of Honor. Number 27, the Espionage Act of 1917. It made it a crime to criticize the war effort, and it goes even deeper than that. This is nothing new. We've had these types of laws before during times of war. Oftentimes during a war, the government takes on more power, in particular the commander-in-chief, the chief executive, the president. During the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln suspended the concepts of habeas corpus and freedom of the press. And so this is nothing new. But unfortunately, it can be twisted and used. Lincoln did. He shut down newspapers who were critical of him and his war efforts as the commander-in-chief of the North during the Civil War. And so things like this Espionage Act, is a good idea, but it can be misused. It can be used to shut down opponents of the war, people who are outspoken against the war, not because they were harming America or America's war efforts, but because they were just opposed to the policy. And there were people, again, it is a crime, there were people who did go to jail as a result of breaking this law. All right, let's continue. I believe we have 2 more slides, numbers 28 and 29. And let's take a quick look at these. As I told you earlier, we would get to the causes of World War I, nationalism, the alliance system, militarism, imperialism. Let me walk through each one a little bit more slowly than I've done previously, so make sure you fully understand it. We'll start with nationalism. Pride in one's country. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, okay? Everyone should be proud of the country they come from. But this pride, okay, this pride became dangerous when nations began to believe that their nation was superior to all others. Now, again, even that isn't that bad. I believe America is the greatest nation that has ever lived. Where nationalism becomes harmful is when I then say, because we're so much better than, just use Mexico as an example, since we're so much better than Mexico, then they don't deserve to rule themselves. Since American culture is so superior to Mexican culture, again, just using this as an example, then they don't have a right to their own culture. We must force them to take on our culture. We will force our culture upon them. So when that occurs, when that national pride becomes so perverted that you do not think other countries deserve to continue unless they follow your culture, your way of life, your way of thinking, when that occurs, it is dangerous. We'll get to the alliance system last. I'm going to save that one for last. Next, let's go to militarism. Again, we're talking about the military building up. European countries began to spend outrageous sums of money arming themselves. If you are a fan of the Sherlock Holmes series with Robert Downey Jr., the most recent one, the second one, shows this. The bad guy, Professor Moriarty, is attempting to bring about a world war so he can make money selling arms to two countries. There's another one, Sean Connery. Love this movie, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Sean Connery, great actor, the greatest James Bond of all time, in case you care. Same concept. A nefarious force is attempting to create a situation where the world will go to war and the bad guys will make money arming both sides. So militarism is European powers spending lots of money to arm themselves in preparation for war. Now again, nothing wrong with that necessarily, but when you add nationalism, a perverted pride in your nation, to militarism, we're starting to see a problem here. Takes us to our third one, imperialism. European powers, and we're talking the English, the French, the Austrians, the Germans, European powers have both economic rivalries with imperialist ambition. So what I'm saying is England was still an empire. Great Britain was still one of the, if not the biggest, greatest empire at that time. There were rivals that they had within Europe, like Germany, like Austria, who were both economic rivals and imperialistic rivals. They both wanted, again, use England and Germany for example, they both wanted to acquire new territories. And again, empires acquire territory so they can have access to raw materials. They have access to new markets. They have room to grow, to move their excess population. And again, in and of itself, being an empire, though not the best thing in the world, but in and of by itself, being an empire is not a bad thing, but when you add it to militarism and nationalism, we're starting to see a huge problem developing, which then takes us to our alliance system, our fourth one. Europe was divided into two armed camps, all with agreements to aid the other in time of war. So, the Archduke Ferdinand of Austria is shot and killed by a Serbian. Austria demands Serbia turn over the people responsible. Serbia says no. Austria starts screaming, talking about invasion. Serbians call their buddies the English. English steps in to help Serbia. Austria declares war on England. Austrians then call their buddies the Germans to declare a war on England. England calls their buddies the French. They declare war on Germany and Austria. Next thing you know, all the dominoes are falling. Imagine this scenario. Junior high girls. Okay? You're going to like this. So you have chick A, girl A, who likes boy A. Girl B used to date boy A, so girl A and girl B hate each other because one now dates boy A, one used to. Girl C is sister of girl A, so girl C now hates girl B because her sister is now dating boy A, who used to date girl B. Oh, it gets better. So girls D, E, and F are cheerleaders, so is girl B. So girl B hates girl A and girl C because girl A is dating boy A and girl C is the sister of girl A, so girl B hates A and C. Girls D, E, and F, who are cheerleaders with girl B, hate A and C because, well, they're friends. Hopefully that explains it. So essentially, I mean, this is kind of sad, but World War I was essentially a chick fight where you had these armed camps, okay? These two armed camps were divided, fighting over something, well, you know, as we look back upon it 100 plus years ago, kind of meaningless. Now, you add the alliance system to nationalism, militarism, imperialism. You add those four things together, and we have World War I. Let's move on to our last slide. The peace terms ending World War I. Now, we know it's the Treaty of Versailles. Talked about that already. But let's take a look at some of the things that were a part of it. Okay? So let us start. Peace terms, number 29. Germany loses territory. Well, all the countries that had lost territory. Germany loses. Austria-Hungary and the Turkish empires, the empires were divided, and a number of new nations are formed. I will show you a map showing you pre-World War I Europe and post-World War I Europe. So we're going to have a number of new countries created from the territories that were lost by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. The third bullet here is that Germany took the brunt or the blame of the war. We often refer to it as the guilt clause. This is in this Treaty of Versailles. The Germans, took full blame for the war and the guilt clause. The clause essentially says, we, the Germans, are fully responsible for all the events, all the death, all the blood, all the destruction. We're responsible. And because of this, they were forced at gunpoint to pay reparations. And keep in mind, I mentioned earlier, $33 billion, which would be in the hundreds of billions, probably upper hundreds of billions of dollars in today's money. Our final bullet, the League of Nations, which was, again, President Wilson's baby, his brainchild, was supposed to provide a forum, to discuss problems, and I gave you an example of a boundary dispute between the United States and Mexico a few minutes ago, before violence starts. Countries can sit down in an environment with other countries, state their issues, state their beliefs, state what they think happened, and then a situation can be, again, let's say, for example, a boundary dispute like the one I gave you. That situation can be remedied before violence begins, before we start shooting. Why did it fail? We never joined. Who be we? The United States of America. Even though it was our president's brainchild, even though it was the creation of, the baby of our President of the United States, we never joined. And because we did not join, it did not succeed. In fact, we never signed the Treaty of Versailles. We never agreed to it. We made separate peace agreements with the countries we're at war with after the Treaty of Versailles was signed. We never joined the League of Nations. We never ratified the Treaty of Versailles. We made separate peace agreements. And because we did not participate in the League of Nations, because we did not join, we at this time, the biggest, most powerful economy, the biggest, most powerful navy, biggest, most powerful military on the planet, because we did not join it, it was doomed to failure. All right, we're going to end it at this time. Those are the vocabulary terms for Chapter 9, World War I.